What is up, everybody? Welcome into this week's episode of High Floor Football. I am your host, Sam Wagman. You can find me on Twitter at Swagman95 always. And with me every week, himself, Jay Arsht. How you doing, man? What's going on tonight?
I am good. Glad to be back. It feels like a normal Tuesday coming back doing our show. You can find me at Jay Arsht right there. My name on Twitter. Not so active. I'm trying to get more. I'm trying to get more going on the Twitter sphere. But you can find me there, and happy to be back. And we're kind of transitioning. Maybe not to my liking as much, but to the general public's liking. We're going a little bit more from Dynasty season over to little bit of the best ball redraft, which is some of the stuff that's coming up right now. So today we're going to do some redraft stuff. We're going to do some superlatives, running backs, quarterbacks, get into a little bit of that. So maybe that'll be more palatable to some of our audience that's not so deep in Dynasty at this time of year.
Yeah, and I mean, look, myself, I'm a big redraft guy for the most part. I prefer it definitely over Dynasty. Have gotten into more best ball as well, and like Jay said, more of a Dynasty guy himself. So this is more me kind of pushing things to do. But I mean, in a weird twist, this week's topic was actually Jay's idea, so I have to give him credit there.
In a
And
twist.
coming up with a nice topic, and we get to talk some what I like to refer to as senior superlatives. We all remember back in high school, yearbooks would go out, and there would be like senior superlatives at the back, and you would have like best partier, and most likely to fail out of college. I don't know what kind of high school you all went to, but look, we're here with our version of superlatives, and we're going to be putting our redraft spin on them. So we used Fantasy Pros ECR, like we love to do, to get our rankings, and we're kind of personalizing this to one QB. So this is going to be for your everyday player that plays in your office league, your home league with your buddies. We're not targeting the super crazed nuts on the Twitter sphere. We're targeting the casual, the everyday player. So we hope you guys enjoy the show, and we're gonna hop right into it. As always, we're on YouTube. You guys can find us on YouTube at High Floor Football. Link is there in the description. Please help us out. Drop a sub, ring the bell. Keep an eye on what we're doing every week as we take you through the fantasy football and NFL offseason, ranging from dynasty to redraft to best ball to free agency, the NFL draft itself. Look, we're a full service team here, and we are here to help you out with everything. But for now, let's get right into it. Jay, start us off. Who is your biggest breakout at the quarterback position for 2022?
Well, my breakout I feel like is semi-popular, but I'm still a little bit surprised to see where he is in the ECR. And like Sam said, ECR expert consensus rankings from Fantasy Pros, which we find is maybe the best resource this time of year to find accurate data. The ADP is a little wacky. Best ball can work, but we talked to our friend Derek Brown. He says they update the Fantasy Pros ECR a lot, so it's helpful to use. Trey Lance right now is, I don't even know if I said it first, Trey Lance is my QB breakout for this superlative episode. He's being ranked right now as the QB 13 in ECR, which, again, it's weird to say it's low because of the small sample size we've seen from Trey Lance. But based on, all the hype, everything that we seem to know about what's going to happen in 2022 with him taking the starting job in San Francisco, it does seem a little low. And my comp in terms of what we just saw in 2021 would be what we saw with Jalen Hurts. And I think a lot of the downside of Trey Lance from anybody who's a doubter or anybody making a case against Trey Lance would be, we have to see kind of how he is as a passer. We're not sure, if he's going to be super accurate. We're not sure how he's developed as a passer in his short time in the NFL. We only saw a small sample size in college as well. But to that argument, I would say, what about Jalen Hurts? I think Jalen Hurts has a lot to go, a lot of work to do as a passer, but as a fantasy asset, I mean, he's money last year. He's a top 10 quarterback. He was the QB1 for stretches of last year. He was maybe the most consistent fantasy quarterback there was for stretches of last year as well. Trey Lance, in his small sample size, we saw him in week 4. He had 24 points. Week 5 against Arizona, 14 and a half. And then he came in at the end of the season, scored 23 against Houston week 17, which for some people like me, you were maybe stashing Trey Lance, throughout the beginning of the season. I got to catch myself every time I almost say something dynasty oriented. From the beginning of the season, you were stashing Trey Lance on a lot of teams because it was him, Justin Fields, some of those high upside rookies that you were hoping could pop. A lot of us were looking at that week 17 Houston game thinking we might be in fantasy championships. Trey Lance gets Houston and San Francisco. That might not have been the case because it took a little while for Trey Lance to get going. You might not have still had him rostered, but he did give you 23 points that week if you played him. And it wasn't all based on, his passing statistics. And none of those outbreaks happened. The week 4, the week 5, the week 17, the 3 big Trey Lance weeks we saw. I mean, he added a little bit on the ground, added a lot on the ground in some of the other ones. So that's kind of my main argument with him is, we've seen a small sample, but we just saw last year's success from a guy like Jalen Hurts, like I said, going into San Francisco, a system that I think the majority could agree is a good system, better than not to be in, especially rushing-wise. He's got good weapons. Deebo Samuel reported back to camp. He's got Deebo, Ayuk. I almost called him Greg Kittle from Pardon My Take, George Kittle. And then the running back stable there, which I think we all would assume San Francisco is going to have a pretty good run game. So Trey Lance is my breakout at QB 13. I think it's still pretty low based on what the upside could be. If he does have a Jalen Hurts sort of breakout, that's an easy top 10 finish. And I think there's, possibility of a top 5 finish if he plays that whole season and, those weapons stay healthy in San Francisco. What do you think?
Yeah. Look, I'm starting to try and sell myself on Trey Lance. Oh, excuse me. And the interesting thing for me with Lance is that this team just hasn't seemed to commit to him. We thought there was something yesterday or the day before when the team said Jimmy G was excused from the mini camp that they were having to rehab his shoulder. But they also said today, there was nothing to take from that. And there was no reason to invite him out for a 3-day session when he was still rehabbing his shoulder, which he had shoulder surgery on this offseason. So here's the main problem is the most basic one for me. They still haven't committed to Trey Lance. This is the guy they spent 2 first-round picks and the number 3 overall pick to acquire the rights to last year. And there have been rumors ever since that truly Kyle Shanahan wanted Mac Jones and was kind of pressured into taking Trey Lance by both the higher-ups and the media. Because when the media found out that Mac Jones was the supposed pick in number 3, well, we both remember what happened that week. Everything went haywire. Everything went crazy. Trey Lance was supposed to be the guy there. And then all of a sudden we're talking about Mac Jones, who has the arm strength of a goldfish, is, in there at number 3. And we both know how I feel about Mac Jones. So I like Lance. Here's the other problem I have with him is the overly simplistic offense that is the only thing that he has any experience running above the high school level. So that's the main problem. NDSU just did not run a very complicated offense. It was mostly digs and curls. It wasn't really anything specific. There weren't a lot of pro style concepts in it, a lot of rushing, and he can throw all of that on, a lot of it back on his rushing. So fantasy wise, I'm starting to come around because we all know that this is a rushing quarterback's game. If you rush, you'll be successful. Jalen Hurts has proved it. Michael Vick has proved it. So many other quarterbacks have proved it. So I can't really use that as a detraction. My main detraction is just going to be the fact that at the end of the day, this team has simply had every opportunity to commit to to Trey Lance as their quarterback, and they really haven't so far. So until they trade Jimmy or cut him, I will not draft Trey Lance because at the end of the day, how do we rule out them not treating him like the Dolphins did with Tua and Fitzpatrick a couple years ago? Where they're swapping in and out. So, he could have one bad game and he's benched for 3 games.
So,
go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I'll counter to those two things that you said really briefly because I know we have a lot of guys to go through here. But I mean, the confidence in Trey Lance, which I think is an interesting topic to bring up. That being said, how do we know that maybe not more of that is happening within the building than maybe they're leading on? I think that there might be more of an idea this year with the way that they've handled this offseason, saying that Jimmy Garoppolo, was going to be traded, which was an earlier offseason thing. Still, it was said. And I think that they're still looking for the Jimmy trade. His surgery, put a little bit of a pause on that. But I'm of the belief that I think there might be a little bit more confidence in Trey Lance and a little bit more certainty within the Niners building than there might be for us right now. Because I agree with you. We are waiting to see what's going to happen with Jimmy G. That being said, I do think they have more of a plan than they might be leading on to us. That seems to be Kyle Shanahan and the Niners' MO to kind of keep things, you know, to themselves. The other thing that I would say about the simple offense, which I don't think is a bad point, my counterpoint to that would be he just spent over a year now in an NFL room, watching NFL film, working, practicing on an NFL team. So how much more can we credit or discredit maybe based on his college offense when now he's spent a decent amount of time in the NFL? It's going on a year and a half of being in an NFL building working on these things. So a lot of assumptions both ways. The downsides would be assuming that maybe they're not as confident in him. Maybe this offense is a little bit too complex. A pro offense might be, and mine is also hypothetical. I'm hypothetically believing that the Niners have a little bit more confidence in him, as well as I'm hoping that he has been able to pick up and develop a little bit in this year's time. So you touched on it already. I mean, we can agree on that. Rushing is king, and rushing quarterbacks are king in fantasy, especially when they might have some of these throwing issues, might have some of the simplicity issues. I mean, at least if they can do it with their legs, it creates a safe floor. So that's my one for my breakout. Who's your first guy?
So my first guy is going to be, look, it's pretty obvious at this point how in I am on Jalen Hurts. And at QB7 right now per ECR, look, I haven't been shy about saying he has QB1 overall upside. I'm not going to stop now, or I'm not going to start now. So,
and I'm not going to stop you either.
Yeah, I mean, look, this is a guy that's ranked 10th in deep ball accuracy last year with 6.4 and 11th in deep ball catchable rate with 61.3%, both of which metrics people said were a massive problem for him, that he couldn't throw the ball down the field. He wasn't accurate. Yeah, there's some truth to that, but it's a little bit more overblown than people think. The simplest thing is that, one, he didn't have the quality of receiver to catch those deep balls. Really, just Devontae Smith. Dallas Goedert had a case of the dropsies. And two, a lot of drops were had by this team. And that's been an Eagles thing over the past few years. So now we add AJ Brown to the mix. And AJ Brown is the type of guy that transforms your offense literally and figuratively from all sides. He's the kind of guy that puts up 1,100 yards, 80 catches, 10 touchdowns with ease. So we could definitely see a huge jump from Jalen Hurts this year. I'm not saying he'll necessarily be the QB1 overall. I do have him as my QB3. He typically fluctuates between QB3 and QB4 on a weekly basis. When he's not QB3, I have him replaced with Lamar Jackson. So it's pretty much just splitting hairs at that point. So, but for me, Hurts is all about, performing at a high level. He's wanted to really take a stranglehold on this job since he was drafted in the second round. And everyone said, Carson Wentz is the guy. Jalen Hurts, why'd you draft him? He's never going to play. Well, now Jalen Hurts is a starter. Carson Wentz is on his third team in as many years. And Jalen Hurts really has a chance to blow the NFL up with one of the easier schedules in the league. I think that Jalen Hurts is definitely a topic to break out this year. He ranked first or second in a ton of rushing advanced rushing metrics as well. So we have every expectation that he's going to continue to rush the ball at a high level. This was still the number one rushing attack last year in the NFL. They didn't change anything about the personnel there. Shane Steichen is going to call more plays, which means there will still be a heavy emphasis on the rushing attack and the play action. And as we've watched Hurts, we know that he likes to play action and wants to get better at it. So everything is pointing up for me. So in my mind, he's the perfect guy as my breakout candidate for the quarterback position.
Put me in a tough spot because, we don't have to debate, but I don't have any debate for you. I also believe in Jalen Hurts. I think he's got very high upside. And, this actually happened in I can't help myself, but it happened in a dynasty league I was in. We were sticking on a redraft. But, there was a little bit of debate going on in our group text about Jalen Hurts and really how much better can he be and really did he hit his ceiling and those kind of things. And it's really like, I just don't understand how you can really say that. We're talking about a guy who finished 6th in points per game last year with Devontae Smith, Jalen Reagor, and Quez Watkins. And, Dallas Goedert too, all the ancillary pieces. But you add an A.J. Brown, and there's actually a really great clip. I don't know if, anybody will be able to find it, but if you're listening and you want to really see the impact of Jalen Reagor or the lack of impact, Brian Baldinger put out a, piece of film that he found from last year in the Tampa Bay game where Jalen Hurts is, dropping back. Jalen Reagor couldn't get off the line of scrimmage. He didn't get off the line of scrimmage. So he didn't make it down the field. Imagine how hard that is for a quarterback. Jalen actually got pressured. Jalen Hurts scrambled out, looking downfield. Jalen Reagor was still at the line of scrimmage, man. These sort of things have a massive impact. And to add a guy like A.J. Brown opposite Devontae Smith, you have a Quez Watkins who's great in his role. He doesn't now have to play a role that he's not comfortable with. He's going to be good at the role as a third guy. Maybe Jalen Reagor mixes in as the third or fourth guy. But, I don't see how you can't expect that Jalen Hurts does a little bit better as a passer with the additions that they've made. And if he's able to continue what he does on the ground, he should be a lock to be a top 10 guy and maybe even a top 5 guy, if it all goes right for him. So I don't have any argument with you. I'm willing to pump Jalen Hurts just as heavy as you are. So I don't have any debate here. I do think it's interesting to hear some of the people kind of, downgrade Jalen Hurts with, like we talked about it with Trey Lance when I was just talking about him too. It's like, oh, well, he still has to develop as a passer. Sure. I don't think anybody's disagreeing with that. We're talking about fantasy points, and he does produce fantasy points. And with an addition of A.J. Brown, I don't think that's going to hurt. I think that's going to help, if anything. So,
yep. Shout out our boy Peng. Biggest Melvin Gordon fan you'll ever meet. I'm sure there's a very limited number, possibly one hand of Melvin Gordon fans, but
he should maybe stay for a little bit then, Peng, and we'll have a little bit of Denver Broncos running back talk. So stick around for that.
Yeah, we'll enjoy that.
I'm going to move to my first quarterback bust, or I guess my only quarterback bust, our first one, and I hate to do it because I love Joe Burrow. So this is not any bit of a Joe Burrow bust in general. This is a Joe Burrow bust at ADP or ECR, or however we want to say it. That's I love that's how fantasy people should say it. And we joke about it all the time. Is we don't hate the player, we hate them at ADP. We hate their ADP. Joe Burrow's ADP right now is QB6, or his ECR on Fantasy Pros QB6. I'm going to keep mixing that up, but that's great. Joe Burrow's great. I think if you're talking about a dynasty league, yes, Joe Burrow should be right in the mix for QB6. If we're talking about next season, I would like to just take a step back here and think Joe Burrow finished as QB10 last year in points per game, which is great. That's a QB1 season, right? Jamar Chase had an electric rookie year. T. Higgins had a good season. The Bengals, pretty much everything was going right for the Bengals in 2021. They made the effing Super Bowl as the Cincinnati Bengals. Nobody was expecting that to happen. Everything went right. Joe Burrow still finished as QB10. He threw 34 touchdowns, 14 interceptions, for 4,600 yards. Those are things, the 4,600 yards maybe can happen again, around that 4,000, the 4,600, that could happen. 34 touchdowns is a decent amount. That's not a joke to just be like, oh, well, he'll roll out and throw 34 touchdowns. It's not an excessive number, but it still takes, a Jamar Chase season. Or what did Jamar Chase score last year? Off the top of my head, 16 touchdowns or something like that.
I think 13, but I'm not sure.
Sure. That's a lot of touchdowns that, would need to happen again. T. Higgins, all those guys. The Bengals are a great offense. Point being, Joe Burrow and the Bengals might have had a peak season last year as an offense, and he still finished QB10. So putting him at QB6, I think he's getting a little bit of the narrative bump. He made the Super Bowl bump. We all love Joe Burrow, me included. But as a fantasy producer, I think you can tell yourself a story that the Justin Herbert, Josh Allen, Kyler Murray, Patrick Mahomes, maybe Jalen Hurts, Dak Prescott, even Russell Wilson. I mean, we're getting to around 10 guys that I think could outscore Joe Burrow, and I wouldn't really blink an eye. So I love him. I love Joe Shiesty, Joe Burrow, whatever the other nicknames are for him. But at ADP, I think you could find better options. I mean, I would take pretty much all those guys that are ranked ahead of him first in fantasy. I mean, I'm taking Allen, I'm taking Herbert, I'm taking Kyler, Mahomes, Lamar, Hurts, Wilson. I'm already at going on 8. So that's my take on him. Again, love Joe Burrow with all my heart, but I don't know that he's going to be a top 5, borderline top 5 at QB6 fantasy producer.
Yeah, and this is also very interesting about it as well. Burrow going 30 picks over Stafford and underdog doesn't make a lot of sense to me. I think what people are doing is reaching on Burrow in order to complete their Chase and Higgins stacks because it's so volatile and it's so close together that Stafford kind of just sits back a little bit there. But people also think Burrow is gonna go crazy, and the problem is there's not much of a ceiling for Burrow unless he gets his mobility back from pre ACL injury, and that's a big thing. We talk about these quarterbacks that can throw for 5,000 yards. Brady is there, Burrow is there, Stafford is there. But unless they run, they can't really get above QB6 at this point because, like we said, we have Allen, we have Mahomes, we have Herbert, we have Lamar, we have Kyler, we have Jalen. That's 6 right there. All of those guys should be taken ahead of Burrow, should be taken ahead of Brady, should be taken ahead of Stafford, Dak, because they run, they use their legs. And it's so underrated for fantasy quarterbacks to be able to run that you just don't see unless a QB has a truly spectacular season. And I'm not saying Burrow can't. In fact, if I had to choose a quarterback that throws the ball 700 times and hits 5,000 plus yards, it's probably him. I just don't see him running enough for it to matter. And that's going to be the thing for this year with him. Does he have enough mobility regained yet?
Yeah, and based on the talent around him, would I be surprised, like you said, that he, if he exceeds expectations, he has, another blow up season with Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, Tyler Boyd, all the guys around him? No, I wouldn't, but I do think a little bit of the Joe Burrow persona and how much we like Joe Burrow and how much he's elevated himself in the NFL as an NFL quarterback has elevated a little bit of his fantasy production where, he still has to, like you said, I mean, these guys add free points on the ground that Joe Burrow just doesn't add right now. So it's a tough thing to compete with. And who's your next guy?
My next guy is going to be my bust for quarterbacks, and it's kind of a crazy one. It's Dak Prescott. And, look, and I understand what a scandalous kind of thing this is because I do realize he was just the QB7 last year, but the problem for me was just I don't see him getting better. I see him regressing. And a big part of that is him losing Amari Cooper, him losing Cedric Wilson. Zeke is back to full health. The line is back healthy and it's only going to try and get better. So here's the problem with Dak. Dak doesn't run much anymore since the ankle injury. Again, it's going to be, it's like a wait and see thing, kind of like Joe Burrow. Has he regained enough mobility off the injury to come back and do this? My guess would be probably not yet, maybe middle of the season. Well, I do remember, and don't hold me to this. I'm not sure how similar ankle fractures and ACLs are, but I do think that it still saps some of your mobility to be able to cut and run like some of these quarterbacks did. And remember, Dak was QB4 in his rookie year on a large part of being able to run, and we just kind of haven't seen that since. So for me, I do think that Dak is going to be fine, but I don't think he's going to get you into the top 10 to where you really need to go with him. I mean, look, he had 146 rushing yards last year, so it just wasn't a thing where we could see him. And I don't think he gets close to 5,000 yards. He had 4,400 yards last year, and that was with all his guys there. He's lost 25% of the targets from last year, and he replaced it with Jalen Tolbert and James Washington. Like, and as much as I liked Tolbert coming out, and as much as I do think he's ready, he's not Amari Cooper. And James Washington is not Cedric Wilson. Like, this was James Washington. It was the fourth or fifth option on the Pittsburgh Steelers. So I do think we need to be kind of tempering expectations with Dak. I saw way too many weeks last year where he had 1 or 0 touchdowns and 1+ interceptions. He only had 7 games over 238 passing yards last year. And for a guy that doesn't run, that's not good. Another thing is that when CeeDee Lamb had to play outside, he won at a much less heavy rate than when he was able to play in the slot. And again, there's no Amari Cooper anymore. There's no one to take over that outside role. It's going to be CeeDee's going to have to play on the outside. And, we know CeeDee, he's a little bit slimmer. He's just over 200 pounds. He's, not this big bulky guy. He's not your typical alpha X wide receiver. And he's going to have to play that role, along with Tolbert. And we're going to see a lot of James Washington's going to split outside a bit. We're going to see a lot of Dalton Schultz, lining up in the slot. My thing is that if CeeDee doesn't produce at where you're drafting him, which is basically like the wide receiver 3 or 4 right now, you're in for a lot of trouble as a Dak Prescott owner, because there's uncertainty with Dalton Schultz. He's holding out from OTAs and voluntary mini camps right now. He wants a new contract. We don't know if they're going to pay him. The Cowboys are usually very quick to pay people that they want to pay. We saw it with Dak. We saw it with Zeke. We saw it with Amari. They were happy to hand out money because they thought they were guaranteed stars. I had an interesting conversation with Sigmund Bloom the other day about maybe the Cowboys think that, or other teams thought that they would guard wide receiver and running back. And if Schultz beats us, so be it. That could be, a thinking of the Cowboys. Maybe he got open. He was shown to be a pretty good route runner, but maybe the Cowboys just see him as a replacement level tight end. It's very possible that they did keep Blake Jarwin for a while. They have Jake Ferguson, who they drafted in the 4th round out of Wisconsin. So if Dak doesn't have his usual guys, that causes me some worry. Like I said, Ezekiel Elliott is healthy. We're going to see some more rushing attempts from him. It's going to be really interesting to see how this shakes out, because we have seen the last 5 seasons for Zeke, the Cowboys shift to more pass heavy to the point they were 60% pass rate and run pass neutral last year. But again, with this change, this extreme change in the Cowboys offense and their personnel, that worries me. And I just don't think Dak is going to hold up. And I would much rather have guys like Russell Wilson and Matthew Stafford and Derek Carr and Kirk Cousins around him at their ADPs than I would to take Dak in the 7th or 8th round.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And I mean, you touched on it pretty early with the rushing not being the same. And, we can understand coming off the injury. But, for 3 straight years, the first years of his career, he had over 285 rushing yards, over 300 twice, and he scored 6 rushing touchdowns 3 years in a row, which scoring 6 touchdowns 3 years in a row for a quarterback is significant, to where in 2021 he dropped off to 1 touchdown. So it's 5 touchdowns, and then he also had only 146 rushing yards. the thing is, he didn't run the ball much less. He had 48 attempts comparatively to 57 and 57 the first 2 years of his career, but a massive difference in the yardage because I would assume, the same thing as you said. I would assume that he's, trying to protect himself a little bit more. He just got this big contract too. I mean, they're not necessarily trying to put him in harm's way. So if the rushing's not there for Dak, yeah, I think, I would say this interestingly enough, and, anybody watching as a Cowboys fan might, not love this. And I like Dak Prescott. So even as an Eagles fan, I like Dak Prescott. I have no qualms with him. But, we were just talking about a Trey Lance and Jalen Hurts, what they do on the ground, those sort of things, saying that Joe Burrow's upside's limited, if he's not able to really, add much on the ground. Dak Prescott also isn't the passer that, Justin Herbert is and, Patrick Mahomes is and all this. He's good. Dak Prescott is very good. Don't get me wrong. He is not one of the elite passers in the NFL. And he did, make a little bit of his fantasy living, I guess I would say, off of his rushing. I mean, it was the combination of the rushing and the passing, a good offense. Whereas now, like you said, the offense might not be as potent as it once was. Might be a little bit more of a, pass-heavy offense, which could be good, but I mean, they lost some guys. Michael Gallup coming back from an injury, Amari Cooper's gone. They're going to rely a lot on CeeDee Lamb. And if Dak Prescott's not running at the same sort of rates that he was, or at least the same sort of statistics that he was putting up those first 3 years, then yeah, I mean, it does limit his upside. I don't think he's as good of a passer as those top guys. And if he's not going to run, then yeah, I think that is a big detractor for him. Like you said, I mean, Dalton Schultz, interesting. They let Blake Jarwin go, but still, I mean, Dalton Schultz being really like your second option in the passing game, we'll see kind of how that works out. So no qualms with Dak, but I also, I could see him not being in that top 10, maybe kind of being a borderline top 12 guy. Whereas, again, we're talking one quarterbacks and redraft, and there are a lot of guys sitting out on the waiver wire in one QB leagues. Whereas, if you do have Derek Carr or Kirk Cousins or some of those guys out producing him, I could see you having the debate of, do I play Dak Prescott or do I play some of these other guys? Whereas, Patrick Mahomes, Justin Herbert, those type of guys, you don't really have that sort of discussion. So this one will be quick. We're going for the dart throw. So I'll preface it a little bit because dart throws in one QB leagues. I don't typically advise carrying two quarterbacks in a one QB league. There are a lot of guys on the waiver wire. We touched on a little bit earlier, the Trey Lance, Justin Fields, those sort of guys who had that big boom potential. You might have held on your bench. You might have stashed them, hoping that they'll break out. This one's a little different, and I know that the fantasy community, a lot of people are a little bit more sour on him. But Kenny Pickett's going to be my dart throw, and I'll try and make a case for it because we're doing dart throws. We're doing a late quarterback thing in a one QB sort of setting, so it is tough. But what we were just talking about with the rushing upside, it doesn't always correlate from college to the pros. I mean, like we said with Joe Burrow, it really didn't that much. That being said, he got hurt, which might have impacted that last year. Kenny Pickett in 2021 at Pitt had 241 rushing yards and 5 rushing touchdowns. The year before, he had 145 rushing yards, not as many rush yards, but 8 rushing touchdowns. So Kenny Pickett's willing to, put himself out there, try and score touchdowns. I mean, that's 13 rushing touchdowns in 2 years, which is something. I'm not saying that he's going to be a rushing quarterback. I mean, we all saw the fake slide, which was epic. So we all see he's got a little bit of that athleticism. It's more the idea that, I think Kenny Pickett has the job in Pittsburgh in the first. I'd be surprised if he doesn't by week 4. I don't think Mitchell Trubisky is going to be good, and I think that you invested in him in the first round with the idea that Kenny Pickett's taken this thing over. I don't think they're going to waste too much time. And when you really look at it, a lot of young quarterbacks that have come in the league, I mean, a lot of the detractors from them is, the offense, the players around them. They go to a bad team. That's not what Kenny Pickett has. He's going to a relatively good team in the Steelers, all things considered, and kind of a loaded offense of young players. I mean, Deontay Johnson, Chase Claypool, Pickens, Freiermuth, Najee. I mean, they all have things, that we could tear them down by. They all have uncertainties, Claypool, Deontay, Pickens. We still got to kind of wait and see how that's all going to work. But if it all works, I mean, that's an offense that could really be dangerous, at least have a lot of weapons to work with. So again, one QB league. I'm not saying, go invest in Kenny Pickett, but we're doing dart throws here. We're saying who we're going to take a chance on. And he's a guy who I think deceptively has a little bit more upside than he might get credit for. I also trust the Steelers, man. And I'm not going to get too narrative based here, but I mean, the Steelers typically draft well. And, talking about George Pickens, when's the last time the Steelers, didn't hit on a round 2 wide receiver? Those guys always kind of come in right in line and they hit. And I think Pickens is going to be good too. So, I mean, having that sort of surrounding cast for Kenny Pickett to start off his career, I think could be fruitful, and maybe at the end of your season have some upside. So,
yeah, all I can think about is how much announcers want to say Kenny Pickett to George Pickens, Pickett to Pickens, Pickett to Pickens every week this season. So, I'm not sure if Kenny Pickett will be good. I didn't come out of my my study on him, saying many good things. I think he's average at best, and I think this entire quarterback class is average at best. So we're gonna see what goes on here. It's like you said though, Steelers typically draft well. We'll see what happens. It really is going to be.
That's the nicest thing you can say. I get that. I mean, I didn't love it either, but I'm making a case for him, and I feel you.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's either Mitch Trubisky or Kenny Pickett. Like, I feel like Pickett has to win the job out of camp simply because you don't want to go in and start Mitch Trubisky. Like, we know he's bad. Like, we've been there. We've done that. We've seen it. Yeah. It's happened. We're sick of it at this point. So
that's why I'm saying at the max it gets to a week 4, because the fans are going to be desperate for Kenny Pickett to get out there if Mitch Trubisky comes out.
Yeah, and people do want to see Kenny Pickett, even though the consensus is kind of that the Steelers reached probably would have been around there at their 2nd round pick, but then they wouldn't have Pickett to Pickens. So
opportunity cost.
Maybe there's a reason for everything.
If I learned one thing in economics, it was opportunity cost.
Opportunity.
And the opportunity to take the quarterback and also come out with Pickens, outweighs.
Dude, Chase Claypool has definitely fallen so hard in the fantasy community. And You know why? Because he's bad.
All right, moving on to Sam's QB dart throw here before we get sidetracked into Chase Claypool.
I could go on a tangent. Davis Mills is someone who I could also go on a tangent about. And while he is QB 28 in Fantasy Pros ECR, you're probably not going to be taking him anywhere in your draft. This is a fun exercise to think about guys who could feasibly be in a position of strength next season. And I definitely think Davis Mills is in that conversation. First of all, he's got a really young team around him. He's got a ton there. The Texans have a ton of draft pick capital to spend over the next few years from the Deshaun Watson trade and other shrewd moves they've made. Look, I mean, he just got a new running back. He got a new wide receiver in John Mechie. Brandon Cooks is still there. Nico Collins is still there, who I will always be a fan of for some odd reason. Brevin Jordan, who was my pet cat at the tight end position this year, is there. So, and I've been a really big fan of Davis Mills, since we saw him play last year. He was arguably the best rookie quarterback last year. That superstar class, that bears worth noting. I mean, he was better than Trevor Lawrence. He was better than Justin Fields. Trey Lance didn't play. Mac Jones. Okay, well, Mac Jones was good, but Davis Mills was arguably more impressive. He had 4 games of over 300 passing yards. He had a 44% deep ball completion percentage. That ranked 4th in the NFL. So this is really interesting. So this is really interesting to see what Davis Mills can do in his 2nd year behind the helm of this offense. Look, they're probably going to be bad. They're not going to win many games. And Davis Mills isn't winning any, first team All-Pro awards. But he could feasibly do something. If Davis Mills is mentioned alongside the likes of Kirk Cousins and Derek Carr and Tua Tagovailoa as solid QB2s next year, that's a massive win for him. This is a guy who was drafted in the 3rd round. They didn't think he would be able to keep the job. They thought he would be replaced in the draft this year. He wasn't. They upgraded the team around him. this guy, like, he has what it takes. He has the skills and the intangibles to go far in this league. So I'm all in, and we could see what happens going forward.
Yeah, we're talking about dart throws here. We're talking about very late, especially in one QB guys, who we're hoping could maybe break out, but you might not really roster or draft too early in a one QB league, which makes sense. Davis Mills fits that category. He's also, quietly something that nobody wants to talk about. Maybe had the best rookie season of the historic rookie class that came in last year. Davis Mills might have had one of the best seasons. So, yeah, he's kind of a funny case, kind of a curious case of the Davis Mills where, roll back in again. Brandon Cook's back. See what happens. Nico Collins, maybe Brevin Jordan, some of the guys you mentioned. But again, it's a dart throw. And a guy like Davis Mills is something that I feel like we don't really know the upside of. He was hurt in college. He came in. Everyone doubted him. He proved us all wrong. So do we really know what's next for Davis Mills? Moving on to the running backs. So, you have something?
No, go ahead.
Moving on to the running backs. My first running back breakout here is Travis Etienne. Yeah. All the hype. Everyone's excited. Training camp, everything, all that. It does matter a little bit with a guy like him because it's somebody who we were waiting to see back on the field. We were waiting to see how healthy he's going to be. I think that was really the biggest downside anybody really had when you're thinking about him. Funny enough, when I made a trade in a dynasty league recently that involved Travis Etienne, involved Brees Hall, involved some other pieces. But, on the surface, it looks a little crazy, right? Brees Hall, 101, top rookie coming in. If Travis Etienne came in this class, I mean, he would have been right up there at the top as the top running back coming in this year, just like, he was in the discussion 2 years ago. So shouldn't be that much of a surprise. We all get a little bit, bored or it gets a little stale, after a year where we miss a guy for the whole year. I don't love to necessarily back players who come into the NFL and essentially do nothing. I mean, he got injured, not his fault, but he's coming off a year of zero production, and we're calling him a breakout, saying that he should be taken highly. On Fantasy Pros ECR, he is. Sorry, my computer just whacked out. We've got Travis Etienne as RB23 for the Fantasy Pros ECR. And the reason that he can break out is I think that's really, I don't want to say it's easy for him to just surpass that. It's still an RB2. I think it's very much in the range of his possibilities. When you look at some of the top guys in, the Fantasy Pros ECR, if you're looking kind of, where guys finished last year, I mean, a lot of these guys are pass catchers. It's DeAndre Swift, it's Austin Eckler, it's Christian McCaffrey to an extent. I mean, he does a lot else. Najee Harris. I mean, they all have to catch passes if you really want to be the top high-end guys. Jonathan Taylor being the semi-exception, although he's still, had some pass catches too. Travis Etienne in college profiled as somebody that can do that. I mean, his last 2 years, he had 37 catches, 48 catches, 432 yards, over 500 yards his last season. So it's something he can do. It's, all the hype of the training camp or the OTAs has been him catching passes from Trevor Lawrence. And you betcha, I am going there with the narrative of Trevor Lawrence and Travis Etienne. This is something that, Trevor Lawrence had a very, I don't even know the right word for it, disastrous rookie season, the way that he came in. And not only his play, the whole organization, everything that was around him was unsettling. Doug Peterson comes in, I think is going to be more of a settling coach, bring Trevor Lawrence back to where, he should have been, have him develop the right way. I think that having Travis Etienne is, one of the best safety blankets he could have. It's his guy from college, stud running back coming back. The thing I would worry about is James Robinson, to an extent. He's apparently sprinting. He's apparently going to have a chance to be back by the start of the season. But the flip side of that is, kind of the point I just made. I mean, a lot of these top running backs, not only are they not, getting all the touches because not too many running backs get all the touches, but look at a guy like DeAndre Swift or the way Alvin Kamara has had success, in fantasy. It's not from, getting 200 carries. It's not from, getting a ton of work like that, but it is making the most of every touch, and, catching passes is worth more than a carry or two. So I'm picking Travis Etienne. I'm praying that he does break out. I think that a lot of us are going to be on that breakout and hope for it to happen. So what are your thoughts on him?
Yeah, I mean, Etienne is an interesting case study for me. Look, like you said, Robinson with the Achilles, I'm not too worried about James Robinson. I'm more worried about the offense as a whole. Um, it sure they spent a ton of money trying to upgrade, but at the end of the day, they added a bunch of replacement level players. I do think the big thing is that Brandon Scherf will definitely help upgrade this offense. On the offensive line, with Brandon Linder retiring, and I definitely think we could see ETN spark. I just don't know how much he'll be used. Like the problem with ETN is we heard all these reports coming out of school about while he's a willing receiver. There's a difference between being a willing receiver and a good receiver, and ETN really wasn't that good as a receiver. Statistically he might have been, but he looked hesitant when making it. He wasn't willing to run certain routes. He wasn't able to run other routes. So, he's a little limited in what he can do. And the question is, that List Frank injury is a tricky one, especially for running backs, because we know they use that jump cut so frequently. So for me, I got ETN at RB21 this year. I don't know if I'm gonna move him any higher than that, because there's so many moving pieces on that offense. I'm just not sure where he kind of lands in the pecking order. They drafted Snoop Connor, which I think is more insurance for James Robinson than anything, but he is that kind of running back that can take touches away. Kind of a bruising guy who can also catch passes in a mold. And for me, I kind of want to see how ETN looks in training camp. I'm gonna tune into some Jags, look at some mini camp reports to try and figure out what's going on with him, how he looks there. But I mean, for now, I want ETN to do well. I'm just not sure that he's as good as everyone thinks he is, and I definitely don't think that if he came out this year, he would have been the number one running back in the class. I think Brees is a much better
I
prospect
said he
than
would
he
be.
was.
I said he would be in contention for it, and I think that. I mean, do you think that Brees Hall was that much better of a running back prospect? That I mean, take out
I
recency
do.
bias than
I
Najee
do.
Harris was.
Yeah,
Travis Etienne went in the first round
I
last
know.
year,
I know.
and my counterpoint to the workload would be, I mean, DeAndre Swift finished RB10 last year in points per game. He only had, I got all my stuff mixed up. He only had 151 carries for 600 rushing yards, 5 rushing touchdowns, but he had 62 receptions for 450 yards.
Mhm.
That's kind of the similar comp to what I would make. And, who knows if he's DeAndre Swift either. DeAndre Swift is a really good player. But
Mhm.
in terms of the workload, I think that there's a possibility that he doesn't get, the workhorse workload that we all, want our running backs to get, while still being able to produce, potential RB1, borderline RB1 numbers. So it's interesting. I think that recency bias gets a little bit in the way sometimes with these guys in terms of like the prospect profiles. I mean, Etienne scored pretty well as a prospect too, so I think he would have been in contention to be the top back this year. But
Yep.
it is what it is. We'll move on to the next
Yep.
guy. And who's your first RB
Yeah.
breakout?
My RB breakout is Aaron Jones, and Aaron Jones is going off the board at RB11 right now, and he should be a lot higher than that. Look, again, this is another guy that I have been not shy about showing that I love this year, and without Devontae Adams in Green Bay, he's the guy there. Like, if you're looking, the key to dissecting the Green Bay Packers offense is to understand who Aaron Rodgers is as a person and what he prefers from his pass catchers and skill position players. And what he wants more than anything else is for players to be solid on his offense, and he wants dependability. He doesn't want guys that are going to drop the ball. He doesn't want guys that are going to misrun their routes. When Devontae Adams left, everything went out the window with this Packers offense, anything that we could have expected. And now what we have is a mishmash at wide receiver. Christian Watson is there. Randall Cobb is there. Alan Lazard is there. Marquez Gallup-Sailing no longer there. Romeo Dubs is there, another rookie that they drafted. Robert Tonyan is there. But above all of them, Aaron Jones is there. And Aaron Jones is obviously the preeminent pass catcher on this offense. And with AJ Dillon there to take more of the punishing runs, Aaron Jones is freed up to run his wheel routes and run all of his pass catching routes that he is so very good at and put up numbers. I mean, this is a guy that has put up numbers on the ground every year that he's been in the league. So, sure, it's gone down a little bit for him in the past few years. You know, this is a guy that had 474 receiving yards in 2019 when he had 19 total touchdowns. And he also had 390 receiving yards last year. So we know he's talented enough to get there. He had 65 targets last year. You know, 100 plus targets and 80 catches is not out of the mold of possibility this year. I could definitely see a obviously unrealistic but possible chance that he is the next player to get 1,000 rushing yards and 1,000 receiving yards if he is extremely efficient on the ground. So I love Aaron Jones. You know, he has less chance of getting hurt because AJ Dillon is running in between the tackles. And we should definitely be anticipating seeing his 2019 numbers when he put up almost 1,100 yards on the ground and almost 500 yards through the air. And he averaged 19.7 fantasy points per game that season, which was good for third in the NFL. This is a guy that I absolutely love. He's my RB6 right now, and RB11 is way too low for him.
Yeah, I'm very high on Aaron Jones this year too for redraft. I think he's going to have a big time year, and I mean you touched on a lot of it, and we'll see kind of what they do before the season starts. But just the lack of receiving weapons that they have, the trust that Aaron Rodgers has with Aaron Jones already, that relationship, and I get the AJ Dillon side of it. I think that they can both flourish. I think AJ Dillon can still be productive while Aaron Jones is kind of the lead guy there, especially for fantasy. I mean, I think AJ Dillon's going to contribute a lot. I think he's going to be viable for fantasy, but I do think that Aaron Jones has like top 5 upside. I mean, what he's able to do as a receiver, what he's able to do, all over the field, the way that they've shown us that they'll use him in the red zone in the past. I mean, you said 19 total touchdowns. I believe he had like 16 rushing touchdowns that year, just off the top of my head. I mean, he's really a can't miss profile in terms of the way that they've used him. They've used him in a lot of different fun ways, and now the way that the roster's kind of shaped itself, I think that he's in for an even bigger season.
Yep.
So
all right, let's get on to your bust candidate.
Going on to my bust candidate, might not be popular, especially not in the dynasty community. Maybe in the redraft community, people can understand a little bit more. Javonte Williams on Fantasy Pros ECR is RB13, which I don't think is crazy. I think he can be an RB2. That being said, last year, his rookie season, he had 50-50 split with Melvin Gordon, however you want to, say it. He finished as the RB26 in points per game. He averaged 12 points per game. So my question would be, what's changed? Melvin Gordon came back, which we all, thought wouldn't be the case, which if that wasn't the case, I mean, we'd be talking about Javonte as potentially a top 5 running back. But the cog that was blocking Javonte from having that major upside is back. It didn't necessarily change. The only thing that changed is Russell Wilson came in. Last year, Melvin Gordon, comparatively finished as RB24 in points per game, right ahead of Javonte Williams. So yes, it's a 50-50 split. We talked about it a little bit before we, came on the show too, just in general, because you were saying you'll fight me on this. You think that, that's a little crazy that he would bust. And again, explaining that I don't hate Javonte Williams. I don't love where his ADP is or where his ECR is in this case, because I still kind of think that, nothing's really changed. I mean, Russell Wilson's there. Offense is better, sure. Bump him up for that, or bump up, the offense for that. But if Melvin Gordon left and they, had Mike Boone playing as his, counterpart, Javonte would be much higher. It's just I'm a little worried that not much is going to change and that we're projecting kind of what we want to happen rather than what's actually being shown to us is going to happen. We all want Javonte Williams to be the top guy. We all want to take him first in our fantasy drafts. A lot of us that play Dynasty know how valuable Javonte Williams is in Dynasty leagues. But carrying it over to redraft, I mean, this feels like a typical kind of redraft Dynasty battle where it's, we want Melvin Gordon to already be gone, and he's not. And so that's sort of the argument that I would make for. I don't think Javonte Williams, finishing as RB13 or borderline RB1 is outlandish by any means. But I don't think that, it's a lock. I don't think him finishing as, an early RB2 or high end RB2, back end RB1 is necessarily in the realm of possibilities if it wasn't last year. So I'm a little bit worried that it's just kind of going to be a similar situation. What do you think?
I definitely think there's a possibility of that. I mean, here's the thing. For me, I've definitely wanted Javonte to be the guy for a while, but the problem I have with continuing to let Melvin Gordon invade, our thoughts is that they re-signed him to a $2.5 million deal. He was not a priority ad for them. Like you said, the offense got better. Here's the thing. Here's the main thing that I take away from this, and it's kind of agreeing with you. Nathaniel Hackett came in, and Nathaniel Hackett comes from Green Bay, where they like to use two running backs in their scheme. And he definitely said right off the bat, I want Melvin to have a role in this offense as well. Here's the thing, though. A role and a 50-50 split are two different things. And I just don't think we see 29/30-year-old Melvin Gordon have another 50-50 split of this offense. And I do think Javonte eats into the touches a little bit more. Literally last year was a literal 50-50 split down the middle. I think Melvin had 15 more carries and Javonte had like 10 more targets.
So
for me, I think they'll be somewhat even, but I do think Javonte takes about a 60, 63, 62%, and Melvin takes about a 35 to 37% of the workload. But I do think that's enough for Javonte if he's efficient enough through the air, and I think he's more involved as a pass catcher. I do think there is a path for him to carve out RB1 sustainability throughout the season.
So two quick counterpoints on it is I don't think that's out of the realm of possibilities that it's not a 50-50 split, but comparing the Fantasy Pros ECR versus where Javonte actually scored in points per game last year, he would have to jump 13 spots, which isn't small. I mean, that's jumping up from an RB3 to a borderline RB1, which is a significant jump. The other side would be, I think I might look at the contract a little differently than you do, whereas you're saying he wasn't a high priority signing, which makes sense. I would look at it more as they just brought him in for $1.5 million. Why wouldn't they just run Melvin Gordon into the ground? They're not paying him anything. He's almost 30. He's on the tail end of his career. Why wouldn't you just do that?
Because they brought him back as a depth piece. They brought him back as a change of pace guy.
Yeah, but says who? Says that you want Javonte to hit?
Says the numbers. The numbers. They're not paying him money to start. They're paying him money to spell Javonte Williams to keep him fresh.
Yeah, but
that's what Melvin's there for.
It doesn't always work like that. It's not. I mean, I haven't seen the Denver.
When you draft a running back in the second round, that's how it works.
Not always, and I haven't seen the Denver Broncos explicitly say that they brought Melvin Gordon back for depth. They didn't. Fantasy people want to assume that Melvin Gordon won't do anything because we want Javonte Williams to hit. Last year, all season, everybody wanted Javonte Williams to also get a role that he didn't really have. It was a Melvin Gordon split. What he just said as well. To jump from RB26 to RB13 on, 10% more work than he got last year, if you're saying a 60-40 split instead of a 50-50 split, you have to also expect that Javonte is going to be as efficient as he was with all those touches, which is tough. I'm a fan of Javonte too. Would I rather have Javonte just have this backfield than Melvin Gordon? I would. But jumping from an RB3 to a borderline RB1 when not much has necessarily changed aside from the number on Melvin Gordon's contract isn't enough to do it for me. I don't hate Javonte Williams at where he's at. I just think that if he has a chance to bust, I think that people are going to be drafting him especially dynasty players. I think dynasty players are going to be drafting Javonte Williams a little bit higher in redraft because of how we value him in dynasty and how we value him long term, rather than what can necessarily be shown to us based on what we saw last year. So that's
and
my counterpoint.
I definitely feel like that's a possibility. And real quick before we jump into my RB bust, I do want to share that Javante's efficiency was good enough to sustain, him being a top 12 guy if he gets that opportunity this year. And his yards created 49.5 per game, ranked 6th in the NFL, and yards created per touch 3.42, number 7 in the NFL. So I mean, he definitely was very efficient from a yards created standpoint. I know that's a pretty sticky number analytically. So,
well, you'd have to assume that he keeps the same efficiency, which it's interesting because I don't know. I mean, you're willing to assume that he keeps the same efficiency while discrediting that they're going to keep the same sort of split, which are both two assumptions in my mind. So
I think at the end of the day, the NFL and fantasy football has mostly moved towards a point where there are very few workhorse backs, and in situations like this, we just have to learn where to pick the back that's going to get that 65% workload, because a lot of backfields are like that nowadays. So, Javonte probably not a great bet at ADP, like Peng is saying, like you're saying, and probably would benefit from going about 6 to 8 picks later. So, we'll go from there. But let's move on. We're running a bit deep here to my RB bust, who is David Montgomery, and I definitely struggled a bit. I'll be very honest. I struggled finding an RB that I thought would bust at ADP, and I eventually settled on Montgomery because one of two things. One, I don't think he's a mid-level RB2. I think he's closer to an RB3 who's been propped up by very good schedules over the past couple of years. The second thing is just I think the Bears giving Montgomery 250 carries a year has been largely because they've had better offenses in the last couple seasons, and I think the bottom is going to fall out this year. Last year, David Montgomery, his true yards per carry was 3.7. It ranked 61st in the NFL, and he had 45 stuff runs, which ranked 5th. Those are not great if you're, even if you're looking for a guy who is, a very volume heavy kind of guy. The problem is if you're not turning that into good yards created, it's just not going to go well. And I think we saw that with him only putting up 840 yards last year. Like I said, paltry 3.7 yards per carry, not great. He ranked 12th in points per game, which was interesting to me. But again, I think this offense almost completely bottoms out this year. I think it's very possible the Bears are the worst team in the NFL, both offensively and defensively. And if they're the worst team defensively in the NFL, they're going to be throwing a ton. They're not going to be running a ton. And look, Khalil Herbert could see more work. We saw him definitely put on an argument to get more work last year. And to me, I don't know if David Montgomery is just that good. That's mainly my problem. He's benefited from such soft schedules down the stretch into the fantasy playoffs that people have prioritized him as like a mid RB2. And I just don't know if that's where he should be. So, I don't know who the Bears are going to throw the ball to this year. That's definitely a conversation for another time. But I don't know that we see David Montgomery put up another RB2 season. I think we start to see him kind of decline a little bit. The wear and tear of that many touches over the past 3 seasons for him could start to wear on him as well. New offensive scheme in place there, with Luke Getsy there as the offensive coordinator. Things will be interesting there. What's your thoughts?
I'll give a quick take on it just because, we're going a little late and I'm going to give you just a quick one just to summarize because I'll find myself rambling if I don't. Is I would take the next 7 to 8 running backs in Fantasy Pros ECR over David Montgomery. So, and I'll list them, if
Yep.
anybody's listening or not looking at it. It's, David Montgomery's at 16. These are all the guys behind him in order that I would take over David Montgomery. You have Cam Akers, Ezekiel Elliott, Antonio Gibson, Josh Jacobs, Brees Hall, J.K. Dobbins, and Travis Etienne. J.K. Dobbins is only subject to assuming he's going to be healthy.
Yep.
But
Yep.
all of those guys I'm taking over David Montgomery. So that's my quick point on him. Not a Montgomery hater, but again, at his ADP or at his ECR, I think all those guys have more upside than David Montgomery. And, don't hit me with the David Montgomery RB4 finish from 2 years ago because
soft schedule.
It's great. Yeah, it happens. It's great. He deserves credit for it, but it's a little while ago now, and I think a lot's changed. So I'm taking those guys after him. Moving on to our dart
Let's hit our dart
here,
throws and wrap this
and
up.
These could be pretty quick. Mine is really going to be quick. Isaiah Spiller, and I might typed in his name real quick there, so correct me if I'm wrong with the Isaiah. I know he even spells it a little bit differently.
It's okay. Isaiah, if you're watching, we're sorry.
Yeah, we're sorry, man. Don't Rashad White me and come at me on Twitter for it. But Isaiah Spiller, man, it's all about upside. If you're taking dart throws, late in the draft, especially, a young running back like that, some of the guys you want to, hit your wagon to. And it's all about upside. It's all about the offense. And part of it's that, contrary to some of the other further back guys, Isaiah Spiller's RB 49 in Fantasy Pros ECR. Abram Smith is a good one too. But Isaiah Spiller, I think is going to have a role. We talked about it before. I think we've talked about him a couple times on our show and past shows, but the Chargers have been trying to fill this role next to Austin Eckler, who's going to be the other back. Kelly didn't really work. Roundtree doesn't seem like he's really working. Justin Jackson, been there for a little while. I think this is Isaiah Spiller's role to lose, really. They drafted him for this. And if an Eckler injury happens, which we all love Austin Eckler, but, smaller guy, he's had some injuries. He misses time throughout the year. He doesn't miss a lot, but he misses some games here and there. And Isaiah Spiller could really be a league winner for you in the Seattle or San Diego, the Los Angeles Chargers offense. So I like Isaiah Spiller as a dart throw. I like to throw some darts on some late round rookies, him, somebody else. James Cook is down there. He would have almost been too easy for me. I think he's a definite dart throw to take, but Spiller's a good one with a lot of upside in a good offense, with standalone value, injury value to really, bump him up to a league winner status. So who is your dart throw at running back?
Well, before I say my dart throw, I do have to note that we are a strict no Melvin Gordon. Well, I am a strict no Melvin Gordon type of guy on this show. And, I hope Jay feels the same way because otherwise I have to find a new co-host. But my dart throw is Darrell Henderson. And look, for me, this is all about the circumstances that surround Cam Akers and what we know about what Sean McVay wants to do with his offense. And so, the hard truth is that Cam Akers is still coming off an Achilles. Like, this is now just about, we're in June. We're about 11 months removed from Cam Akers ripping his Achilles last summer. Achilles injuries typically take 12 to 18 months for guys to fully come back with. Like, this is the issue here. I want Cam Akers to do well as much as anybody. The problem is Cam Akers going to come back? They gave him a very healthy workload, but he looked in the Super Bowl and in the playoff run. And Darrell Henderson looked decent. He took that wheel route for a big gain down the sideline in the Super Bowl for like 30 yards. Darrell Henderson, could see some work here. It's worth noting that whatever back that Sean McVay feels like riding gets the hot hand, and they're a workhorse. That's typically how we know this Rams offense to run. If something happens to Cam Akers, Darrell Henderson is in line for a massive workload. So Cam Akers is RB17 in ECR right now. That's fine with me. Darrell Henderson being RB45 in ECR right now, that's not fine with me. He is probably one of the best handcuff options in this league. And we're at a point again where you need to have these handcuffs because running backs get injured all the time. We saw it last year. People were unprepared when all these running backs went down. So Darrell Henderson for me is a slam dunk at his ADP. I'm going to have a ton of him this season. That's my guy there.
So I like Cam Akers. I like Darrell Henderson, and I have a little, stat I can pull for your Darrell Henderson here for shout out Joe Holka. I know you like him. There's a stat that he dropped. I don't know if you saw it earlier or not, but I happened to see it and screenshot it because I thought it was interesting. And then you picked Darrell Henderson as your running back. He said same thing. No secret, the Rams prefer Akers. However, Henderson scored 13 points per game when he was healthy last year. For comparison, Clyde Edwards-Helaire scored 11 and Tony Pollard scored 10 when they were both healthy. So when you're thinking about, again, dart throws like that, I mean, Henderson's an injury away from maybe 13 points per game, which is already more than a Clyde, Tony Pollard, those type of RB2, RB3s with potentially more upside. He has standalone value if Cam Akers, doesn't get right. Even if he does, man, I mean, if Cam Akers, and I love him, and I'm in on Cam Akers, I think he's going to be fine. But if Cam Akers comes back, there's still a chance that he could be healthy and just not perform to, the standards that they want him to be at. And that could, let Darrell Henderson cut back in after all of us Cam Akers stands put in so much work to get rid of him. So it's an interesting one. I think he's a good dart throw in a good offense. So that's always a good dart to throw.
Yep. But that is everything that we have for this week's show, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in. Big shout out to our boy Peng, and I saw Ben, our boy, in the chat earlier as well. Thank you guys for tuning in. Thank you guys for hanging out with us. We will be back next week for part 2 of this series. We will be talking our favorite superlatives for wide receivers and tight ends, and then after that, we are heading straight into best ball season. We're going to bring on some awesome guests for you guys. We got some cool stuff planned out. Rest of the summer is going to be a blast. But that is it for us this episode of High Floor Football. You can always find me, Sam Wagman, on Twitter at Swagman95, Jay Arsht over on Twitter at Jay Arsht. And please, as always, give us a follow on the YouTube. Give us a subscribe, ring the bell, help us out there. Thank you, guys. We will see you next